At my mother's funeral, my husband grabbed my wrist in front of everyone and threatened to drag me home. That's the moment I realized I had to choose. Stay and disappear, or leave and find myself. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment where you are watching from. Thank you. Hello everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I want to share a story with you today. A story about loss, heartbreak, and finding yourself when you thought you were lost forever. This is a true story, and it's one that I think many of you might recognize in your own lives or in the lives of people you love. My name is Rachel, and I'm here to tell you about the day my mother died and the day I finally started living. It was a cold morning in February when we laid my mother to rest. Her name was Margaret, and she was the strongest woman I've ever known. You know, that kind of person who makes everything feel safe just by being in the room. That was my mom. She was my best friend, my guide, my anchor in a world that often felt too big and too cruel. She had fought a long illness, almost 2 years of doctors, hospitals, and sleepless nights. But I was there through it all. I took care of her, held her hand, and listened to her tell me things she'd never said before. One of the last things she told me was this: "Rachel, you deserve peace. Real peace. Not the kind where someone is controlling you or making you feel small. I'm talking about the kind of peace where you can breathe." I remember sitting there beside her hospital bed, holding her hand, and thinking that I didn't know what that kind of peace felt like anymore. And honestly, I hadn't known for years. The day of her funeral came, and I dressed in black. I remember looking at myself in the mirror, really looking at myself, and barely recognizing the woman looking back. When had I become so small? When had my shoulders started curving inward like I was trying to disappear? My husband, Marcus, was getting ready in the other room. We'd been married for 11 years. 11 years of a life that looked perfect on the outside but felt suffocating on the inside. When we first met, Marcus was charming. He was confident in a way that made me feel safe. He knew what he wanted and he wanted me. Or at least that's what I thought at the time. But somewhere along the way, that confidence turned into control. He started telling me what to wear. He didn't like bright colors, he said they didn't suit me. He wanted to know who I was texting and why I needed to talk to my friend so much. When I wanted to drive to see my best friend who lived 2 hours away, he said it was too dangerous for a woman to drive alone. He said he was protecting me. He said he loved me. But after a while, I started to wonder if love was supposed to feel like a cage. My mother knew something was wrong. She could see it in my eyes. But I always made excuses for Marcus. He was just stressed at work. He just cared too much. He just wanted the best for me. We all tell ourselves stories like that, don't we? We make excuses for the people we love, even when those people are slowly breaking us into smaller and smaller pieces. That morning of the funeral, I walked downstairs and found Marcus already dressed in his dark suit. He looked handsome, I'll give him that. He looked like a good husband. But I could already feel his impatience radiating off him like heat. His jaw was tight. His fingers were drumming against the kitchen counter. He kept checking his watch, even though we didn't need to leave for another hour. "Are you ready?" he asked, not looking at me. "Almost," I said. "I just need a few more minutes to." "We don't have time for you to fall apart today," he interrupted. "Your mom's already gone. There's nothing you can do about that now. So please, just pull yourself together and let's get this over with." I felt something twist in my stomach. But I didn't say anything. I never did. The funeral service was held at a small church near my childhood home. The pastor was kind. The flowers were beautiful. And Marcus sat beside me, looking respectful and concerned to anyone who might be watching. But he was already checking his phone under the program, already sighing loudly when the service ran longer than he expected. When my aunt stood up to read a poem my mother loved, a poem about finding strength in darkness, Marcus leaned close to me. I could smell the coffee on his breath. "How long is this going to take?" he whispered. "Tell me we're not doing the whole cemetery thing too." I didn't answer him. I was trying to hold back tears, trying to focus on my aunt's voice, trying to honor my mother in that moment. But Marcus didn't like being ignored. He grabbed my wrist. Not hard enough to leave a visible mark, but hard enough that I could feel the anger in his grip. His fingers were like a vice around my skin. "Get home now," he whispered through his teeth, his voice sharp as a knife. "Or I'll drag you back myself." I looked around. Several people nearby had heard him. My cousin, an old neighbor of my mother's. Even the pastor, who had paused for just a moment before continuing to read. My face went burning hot with shame. Not because of anything I had done, but because my husband had just threatened me in front of all these people, and they all knew it. I pulled my wrist free, trying not to make a scene. But inside something broke. It was like a glass that had been cracking slowly for years, and in that moment it finally shattered. The rest of the service passed in a blur. I barely heard the words. All I could hear was Marcus's threat echoing in my head over and over. "I'll drag you back myself. I'll drag you back myself." When the service ended, Marcus walked straight out of the church without saying a word to anyone. He didn't wait for the burial. He didn't shake the pastor's hand or say goodbye to my family. He just pushed open those heavy doors and walked to the car, his shoes scraping on the stone steps. Everyone watched him go, and I stood there, frozen, watching the door he disappeared through, feeling a strange emptiness spread through my whole body. My aunt came over and wrapped her arms around me. "Honey, don't let him upset you," she whispered. But her voice sounded far away, like it was coming from underwater. I nodded and thanked people for coming. I accepted their condolences. I did all the things you're supposed to do at a funeral. But I wasn't really present. It was like I was watching myself from somewhere outside my own body. For a while, I stayed in the church while everyone else headed to the cemetery. I looked at the flowers around the altar, at the framed photo of my mom smiling in her garden from just a few summers ago. I tried to cry, but nothing came. I felt hollow, like someone had taken all the air out of me. While I stood there alone in that quiet church, memories kept flashing through my mind like old photographs. Marcus's voice telling me what to wear. Marcus checking my phone. The time I wanted to visit my friend in Charlotte, and he said it was irresponsible. Marcus saying I was too emotional when I got upset. Marcus saying I should be grateful he even put up with me. And underneath all those memories was my mother's voice, clear and strong. "He doesn't love you, Rachel. He owns you. There's a difference between love and control." I had told her she was overreacting. I had defended him. I had made excuses. But standing there in that church with my mother gone, I finally understood what she meant. All these years I had been slowly disappearing. And the man I thought loved me had been holding the eraser. When I finally left the church, the sun was hanging low in the sky, turning everything orange and pink. The parking lot was almost empty. Marcus's truck was gone. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine, just gripping the steering wheel and staring ahead. The drive home was quiet. Every mile felt heavier than the last. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sun had almost completely disappeared, and the sky was turning dark. When I walked through the front door, Marcus was sitting on the couch eating chips, watching TV like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't humiliated me at my own mother's funeral. Like he hadn't threatened me in front of all those people. He looked up when I came in. "You took long enough," he said. "Did you even bother to clean up after the service? The house is a mess." I just stared at him. My mind was completely empty. My heart was cold. He talked for a few more minutes about how boring the day had been, how emotional people are at funerals, how I needed to move on and stop dwelling on things. I didn't answer. I just stood there listening to his voice, feeling nothing. Then I went upstairs, changed out of my black dress, and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence in that room was thick and heavy, pressing against my skin like a weight. I felt trapped inside it. But at the same time, I didn't want to break it. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, staring at the wall, realizing that my mother was gone. And so was the part of me that still made excuses for Marcus. The next morning, Marcus acted like nothing had happened. He poured his coffee, turned on the news, and asked if I planned to mope around all week. When I didn't answer, he laughed and said, "You were so dramatic at the funeral, Rachel. Everyone could see it." It was embarrassing. I stood by the counter, holding my coffee cup, watching the steam rise into the air. I didn't trust myself to speak. If I opened my mouth, I was afraid of what would come out. There was something building inside me now, something quiet and dark and powerful. He kept talking, his voice calm and almost bored. "She's gone," he said about my mother. "You need to get over it. People die. That's life. You can't just fall apart every time something bad happens." I looked at him then, really looked at him. And I saw him for the first time in years exactly as he was. Not the man I had fallen in love with. Not the version of him that existed in my mind. But the real Marcus. A man who was cold. A man who felt nothing for my pain. A man who had spent years wearing me down, making me smaller, stealing my voice. "Okay," I said quietly. He seemed surprised that I was finally responding. He grabbed his keys and stood up. "Good. I'll be home late. Don't wait up." Then he left for work, whistling like he hadn't just ripped open a wound that was still bleeding. For a long time after he left, I just stood there in the kitchen. The emptiness I had felt at my mother's funeral was still there, but underneath it, something new was starting to grow. It was a quiet anger, the kind that doesn't burn hot but burns cold, like ice forming slowly over water. Over the next few days I started noticing things. Small things that didn't add up. Receipts for restaurants I had never been to. Gas charges in towns Marcus had never mentioned visiting. One night when he came home late, I could smell perfume on his jacket, something floral and too sweet to be mine. "Where were you?" "Yes. Working late at a client's house," he said. "Why? Don't you trust me?" The way he said it made me feel bad for asking. That was something Marcus was really good at. Making me feel guilty for asking questions I had every right to ask. The next morning, I found a folded napkin in his jeans pocket. There was a lipstick stain on it. When I held it up and asked him about it, he laughed. "You really need a hobby," he said. "You're acting paranoid. This is why I don't like to spend time with you, Rachel. You're always suspicious." He snatched the napkin out of my hand, tossed it in the trash and added, "You're lucky I put up with this." That word, lucky, stuck with me all day. I kept thinking about it. Lucky. As if I should be grateful for a man who controlled me, criticized me, and was apparently cheating on me. As if I should be grateful for crumbs when I deserved a full meal. That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to his steady breathing, watching the rise and fall of his chest. The anger was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't loud anymore. It was calm and sharp, like ice forming over water. I started paying attention to everything. Time he got home. The way he avoided looking at me when I asked simple questions. The smell of perfume that kept appearing on his clothes. The new shirt he hadn't told me about. The cash withdrawals that didn't make sense. I bought a small notebook and told Marcus it was for grocery lists. But inside I wrote single words: perfume. Late nights. Hilly. Each page felt like a step out of the fog. Each word was a piece of clarity returning to me. When Marcus looked at me, he still saw the same obedient wife who would forgive him no matter what. But something in my eyes must have changed, because he stopped meeting them as often. He thought he still had complete control over me. But he didn't know I had finally started paying attention. And once I started, I couldn't stop. A few days later, I drove to my mother's house to start going through her things. The place felt strange without her. The air still smelled faintly of her lavender lotion. Her reading glasses sat beside the couch, like she might come back any minute to pick them up. I stood in the doorway for a long time before I could even move. The weight of her absence was crushing me in the best and worst way possible. Boxes and drawers were everywhere, filled with pieces of her life. Old photographs, recipe cards in her handwriting, birthday cards she had saved from me over the years. Every little thing reminded me of her voice, her hands, her gentle way of fixing everything. It hurt to look at, but I needed to do it. I wanted to feel close to her again. While I was sorting through papers in her old desk, I found a small envelope tucked between two books. My name was written on it in her familiar handwriting. Rachel. Froze. I just held that envelope in my hands, afraid to open it, afraid of what she might have wanted to tell me that she couldn't say before she died. We had talked about so much during her illness, her life, her regrets, her hopes for me. But there was one thing she had wanted to say that she kept saving for a letter. I could feel it now, holding that envelope. When I finally opened it, her handwriting filled the page. She had written, "My dearest Rachel, if you ever feel trapped, the cabin is yours. No one can hurt you there. I love you so much. I always have. Be brave, sweetheart. You are stronger than you know. Love, Mom." My hands shook as I read those words. I could hear her voice so clearly in my head, calm and loving and certain. I remembered the cabin, an old wooden place near the Blue Ridge Mountains. We used to go there in the summers when I was little. It was my mother's quiet place. She called it her sanctuary. It was where she went to think, to heal, to remember who she was when the world tried to tell her who to be. There was another envelope inside the first one. It held the deed to the cabin and a note from her lawyer confirming a small savings account in my name. I stared at it for a long time, my eyes blurring with tears. Even after she was gone, my mother was still taking care of me. Even after she was gone, she was still giving me a way out that I hadn't known I needed. The tears finally came then, slow and heavy. I sat on the floor of her house with that letter in my lap, whispering, "Thank you, Mom. Thank you. I understand now." Felt like she was right there with me in that moment. Like her love was still wrapped around me, steady and warm, holding me up. I folded the papers carefully and tucked them back into the envelope. As I drove home, I kept thinking about her words. No one can hurt you there. It felt like she had known exactly what my life had become, even though I'd tried so hard to hide it from her. She had seen through all my excuses and all my lies. She had known her daughter was in pain. And she had spent her final days making sure I had a place to run to. When I got home, Marcus was already there, sitting on the couch. He didn't ask about my day. He didn't ask how I was feeling or how my mother's house looked or if I needed help. He just asked, "What's for dinner?" "I'll figure something out," I said and went upstairs. I slipped the envelope under my clothes in the back of my dresser drawer. It was the first real secret I had ever kept from Marcus. Holding it there, hidden away, felt dangerous and liberating at the same time. For the first time in years, I felt a tiny spark of safety. Like maybe, just maybe, I had somewhere to run when the time came. One morning a few days later, Marcus was in the shower getting ready for work. I stood by the window and watched him through the reflection in the glass. He was humming, cheerful in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Something about it didn't sit right with me. My gut told me to look closer, though I didn't know what I was looking for. When he left his keys on the kitchen counter, I picked them up and walked outside to his truck. My heart was pounding. I knew I was crossing a line, but I also knew that something didn't add up. I opened the glove compartment. Just old receipts and a few tools. Nothing interesting. Then I checked under the seat where he usually tossed things. That's when I saw it. A small velvet pouch, black and soft, tucked underneath some papers. My fingers hesitated for just a moment. But I opened it anyway. My hands were shaking. Inside was a gold bracelet, delicate and shiny, with a tiny heart charm hanging from it. I turned it over in my palm, and that's when I saw the engraving on the inside. It was a short message. To D. Love, Haley. My heart stopped completely. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Haley. I knew that name so well. She was his co-worker. The woman he mentioned constantly. Haley said this. Haley brought donuts to the office. Haley's husband doesn't appreciate her. I'd never thought much of it before, just filed it away as office gossip. But now every mention of her came flooding back like a storm breaking loose. All those times he had said her name. All those times he had smiled when she came up in conversation. I stood there for a long moment, the bracelet cold in my hand. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears like a drum. It was like the ground had opened up beneath me and I was falling into a darkness I couldn't escape. But then something strange happened. I didn't fall. Instead, I felt myself land on solid ground. The shock was sharp, yes. The hurt was real, absolutely. But underneath it all was something else. Something calm. Something clear. This was the proof I needed. This was the moment everything changed. I slipped the bracelet back into the pouch, put it exactly where I found it, and walked back inside. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down at the kitchen table. I just sat there, staring at my hands, feeling my pulse slow down. For the rest of that day, I tried to act normal. I made dinner, cleaned the kitchen, answered his questions. But every time Marcus smiled at me, I saw the bracelet in my mind. The way her name looked carved into gold. The way he had been lying to my face. That night, when he came home late, I asked him where he'd been. Just working with Haley on a late project, he said, not even trying to hide it. I nodded, pretending to believe him. But I was done with pretending. I was done making excuses. I was done being small. A few days later, I heard Marcus in the living room on the phone. I was upstairs in the bedroom, folding laundry, and I heard his voice drift up through the vents. His tone was soft, different, the way he used to talk to me years ago, back when I still believed in him. I stopped what I was doing and moved closer to the vent to listen. "Just a little longer, babe," he was saying. "Once Rachel gets her mom's inheritance, we'll have what we need. Promise. We can finally do this." My stomach dropped. My knees nearly gave out. I had to grab the edge of the dresser to keep from falling. He hadn't just been cruel to me. He hadn't just been cheating on me. He had been waiting. Waiting for my mother to die. Waiting for the money that was supposed to be my safety net. Waiting for the right moment to destroy me completely. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. I was terrified he would hear me. Terrified and furious all at once. I closed my eyes and just stood there, trying to process what I had just heard. When he hung up, I walked quietly back to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. I stared at the wall for a long time, not even crying. The tears wouldn't come. It was too deep for that. What I was feeling wasn't sadness anymore. It was something sharper, heavier, more powerful. It was clarity. It was purpose. It was the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. In that moment, I realized that Marcus hadn't just broken my heart. He had been planning to destroy me completely. He had been using my mother's illness against me. He had been counting the days until she died so he could steal her gift to me. And I wasn't going to let him. I stood up. I looked at myself in the mirror, and for the first time in years, I recognized the woman looking back at me. She was angry. She was hurt. But she was also determined. She was also strong. "It ends now," I whispered to my reflection. The next morning I woke up before Marcus. He was still asleep, his arm thrown over the pillow, looking peaceful and innocent. I lay there for a while, staring at him, feeling nothing. No anger, no fear, just a calm emptiness. I knew what he was doing now. I knew exactly what he was planning. And I knew I had to be smarter than him if I wanted to survive this. When he finally woke up, I smiled at him like everything was fine. I made coffee, packed his lunch, even kissed his cheek before he left for work. He looked surprised, almost suspicious. But then he smiled, thinking he still had me fooled, thinking I was still the obedient wife who would let him walk all over her. That was exactly what I wanted him to think. Over the next few days, I played the role of the perfect wife. I laughed at his jokes. I made his favorite dinners. I listened when he complained about work. I nodded and smiled while inside I was counting down the days. Each time he left for work, I quietly packed a few things. Sweater, some photos, my mother's jewelry, important documents. I placed them in a small box in my car trunk, then drove them to the cabin when I had a chance. The road to the cabin was long and quiet, surrounded by trees on both sides. Each trip felt like I was breathing again, like I was moving a little closer to freedom. The cabin looked the same as I remembered it. Small, peaceful, tucked away in the woods where no one could find me. My mother had filled it with love years ago, and it still felt like her. I left my things there carefully, hiding them in the closet. I didn't stay long. I didn't want Marcus to wonder where I was. One afternoon, I drove into town to meet a lawyer, Mr. Henderson, my mother's old friend. He had known me since I was a kid. When I walked into his office, I felt nervous. This was real now. This was actually happening. I told him everything. About the abuse. About the infidelity. About the bracelet. About overhearing him planning to take my mother's money. And about the cabin and the inheritance that my mother had left me. He listened to me carefully. His eyes kind but serious. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I'm so sorry you've been through this," he said finally. "But I want you to know something. You did the right thing coming here. Your mother would be very proud of you right now." Hearing those words felt like lifting a weight off my chest. The weight I had been carrying for so long. "I want to make sure the cabin and the savings account are in my name alone," I said. "I want to make sure Marcus can't touch any of it." "I understand," he said. "Let me see what I can do." By the end of the meeting, everything was secure. Marcus couldn't touch a cent of it. The cabin was legally mine. The savings account was legally mine. And I finally had something that was completely, entirely, without question mine. That night, Marcus came home angry about something at work. He slammed the door, muttered curses, and started yelling about the dinner not being ready. I had planned this. I had made sure dinner would be late. I didn't argue with him. I just set my phone on the counter, making sure the recording app was running. His voice filled the room, sharp and cruel. Every word burned, but I stayed calm, letting him talk. I recorded everything. "You're so useless, Rachel," he shouted. "You can't do anything right. No wonder your mother didn't want to spend time with you before she died." The words hurt. They were meant to hurt. But I didn't react. I just stood there recording, feeling nothing. He was showing me exactly who he was. And I was making sure I had proof of it. I started doing that often after that day. Recording when he shouted. Recording when he called me names. Recording when he twisted stories to make me feel small. Each clip was proof of who he really was. Each recording was a piece of my escape route. Every day, I smiled a little more in front of him, but it wasn't real. It was a mask I wore so he wouldn't see the change happening inside me. I wasn't scared of him anymore. I was planning. I was preparing. I was getting ready to leave. Then Marcus decided to host a dinner party one Friday night. He said it was for business, just a few co-workers coming over. I already knew what that meant. Haley would be there. He tried to act casual about it, but I could see the excitement in his eyes when he mentioned her name. I could see the way his fingers lingered a moment too long on his phone when a text came in. I smiled and told him it was a great idea. Inside I was calm, almost too calm. I had crossed over into a place where nothing he did could hurt me anymore. I had already decided to leave. Everything else was just details. I spent the whole day cleaning, cooking, and setting the table. Marcus didn't lift a finger. He just walked around giving orders like he always did. "Make sure the house looks perfect," he said. "I want to make a good impression." I nodded and did everything he asked, keeping my voice light and pleasant. All the while, my mind was on the box of evidence I had prepared. The recordings, the bank statements, photos, the deed to the cabin, everything I would need when the time came. When the doorbell rang, Marcus's whole mood changed. He became charming and loud, welcoming everyone like the perfect host. Haley walked in wearing a red dress and a bright smile. She hugged Marcus a little too long. Caught the look they shared. It was quick but clear. My stomach tightened, but I didn't let it show. During dinner, Marcus bragged about his work and made jokes at my expense. Every time I spoke, he interrupted. When I brought out dessert, he rolled his eyes and said, "You finally did something right tonight." The table went quiet for a moment, and then he laughed like it was just a joke. Everyone forced a smile. Haley giggled softly, glancing down at her plate. I stood there holding the serving dish, feeling all their eyes on me. For a moment, I almost felt the old pain, the sting of humiliation. But then it disappeared. I was done being hurt by him. "I'm glad you all like dinner," I said calmly. "Excuse me for a moment." I walked upstairs slowly, every step steady. In our bedroom, I opened the drawer where I'd kept my folder. Inside were printed copies of bank statements, photos, and the recordings I'd made of his outbursts. My hands didn't shake this time. I placed them neatly in my bag along with my wallet and keys. Downstairs, I could hear laughter again. His voice loud and confident. He had no idea what I was doing. He thought I was upstairs falling apart. But I was upstairs preparing for my freedom. I checked my phone one last time and confirmed the final transfer. My savings and inheritance now safe and unreachable by him. I was done. I changed into jeans and a sweater, took one last look around the room, and quietly closed the drawer. My mother's necklace glinted on the dresser. I picked it up and put it on, feeling its small weight against my skin. Felt like she was there watching me leave. Like she was giving me her blessing. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps soft on the carpet. No one noticed as I slipped out the back door. The night air was cool and still as I walked to my car. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I got into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. As the house disappeared in my rearview mirror, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't look back. I just kept driving, steady and quiet, toward the cabin waiting for me in the mountains. It was late when I arrived. The cabin looked like it was sleeping, quiet and peaceful in the darkness. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It smelled like pine and rain and memories. Everything was just as I remembered it. Small but full of warmth. The walls were lined with old photographs of my mother. A quilt she had sewn years ago was folded neatly on the couch. Books were stacked on the shelves. It was like stepping into a hug from her. I turned on the lights and sat down on the couch. For the first time in 11 years, I was completely alone. And it felt like freedom. The first few nights were strange. I would wake up expecting to hear Marcus's footsteps in the hallway or his angry voice from downstairs. But there was only silence. It took time for me to understand that silence could be peaceful, not frightening. That silence could be safe. I made coffee in the mornings and sat on the porch, watching the sun rise over the hills. The quiet started to feel like freedom. The solitude started to feel like healing. Then the calls began. At first just one or two a day, then dozens. Marcus's name flashing on my phone screen again and again. I didn't answer any of them. Sometimes he left messages. His voice jumped between fake concern and pure anger. "You can't just leave like that," he said in one. "Come home like a real wife. We can work this out." In another he shouted, "You'll regret this, Rachel. You think you can live without me. Nobody wants you but me. You're nothing without me." I deleted every message without listening to them all the way through. I didn't owe him another word. He had taken enough from me already. A few days later, I met with Mr. Henderson again, the lawyer. He had already prepared the divorce papers. I handed him the folder of evidence, recordings, receipts, photos, and the copy of the bracelet I had taken before leaving. He listened quietly while I explained everything, though he already knew most of it from our first meeting. He looked at me when I finished and said, "You've done the right thing, Rachel. You've been very smart and very brave. Your mother would be proud." Hearing those words, I finally let myself cry. The tears came slowly at first, then faster, until I was sobbing in that lawyer's office. I was crying for the years I had lost. I was crying for the woman I had been before Marcus. I was crying for the mother I would never see again. And I was crying with relief that it was finally over. "We filed everything this afternoon," Mr. Henderson said, handing me a box of tissues. After that, I tried to focus on small things. Painting the front steps of the cabin. Cooking simple meals. Reading old books my mother had left behind. Sitting on the porch and watching the world go by. But each day, I got updates from Mr. Henderson. Derek had received the papers and was furious. He had tried calling the lawyer, threatening to fix this, but it didn't matter. The proof was solid. The recordings were clear. The evidence was irrefutable. Soon parts of the legal case became public. His messages to Haley. The recordings of his verbal abuse toward me. The evidence of the affair. The proof that he had been planning to steal my inheritance. Some of his clients saw it. One by one they stopped hiring him. His business started to fall apart not because of anything I had said but because of what he had done. I didn't feel joy watching him fall. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about peace. Real peace. The kind my mother had told me I deserved. I sat on the porch one evening, my phone buzzing beside me. Another call from Marcus. Another message. I let it ring until it stopped. The world was quiet again. The sunset painted the trees in soft orange light. I wrapped my mother's old blanket around my shoulders and breathed in the cool air. You can shout, threaten, or beg all you want, I whispered to myself. I'm done listening. You had your chance, and you wasted it. He had taken enough from me already. Now I had something he would never have again. Freedom.